Hello, before moving on to the brain anatomy, I would like to just quickly talk about the neural pathway involving a reflex arc. Okay, so for example, if you have your hand touch something like hot, okay, something here, and it hurts your hand, the first neurons that will detect that are of course your sensory neurons. So the sensory neuron will detect it, send a signal, an impulse. So this is the dendrites of the sensory neuron. They will send a signal which will enter the spinal nerve. From the spinal nerve it will go into the posterior root, and then the head of all sensory neurons, in this case of the peripheral nervous system, are located in the posterior root ganglion. So the posterior root ganglion is basically a cluster of soma of sensory neurons. So the head is there, and then the signal then continues down the axon, goes into through the posterior root into the rootlets, into the posterior horn of the gray matter of spinal cord. There it will synapse with another neuron called interneuron, a neuron between two neurons. So this is the motor neuron, sensory neuron, interneuron. The interneuron will then send signal to the motor neuron and to other neurons that will send the information up to the brain so that we perceive the sensation of pain. Okay, so this one here, this motor neuron, which is multipolar, your sensory neuron is a pseudo-unipolar. The motor neuron then goes, which is within the anterior horn, the heads, you see the heads of sensory neurons are in the posterior ganglion, the heads of these guys are in the anterior horn. So from this, these guys will send their axon out via the anterior rootlet, anterior root, out through the spinal nerve. So you see the spinal nerve has both sensory and motor. From the spinal nerve, it will then go to the muscle, and the muscle could be, for example, your biceps brachiomuscle, whose contraction will flex your arm away from whatever it was that was hurting your hand. Okay, so this is called the neural arc. That's an arc with a C. The neural arc, because you can see, it does resemble an arc. Sensory neuron comes in, motor neuron comes out. Okay? The nervous system consists of two systems, the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system consists of all other neurons that are outside of the central nervous system. And those include the spinal nerves and cranial nerves. We'll talk about the cranial nerves later. We've already talked about the spinal nerves. Okay, we'll come back to this in a second. So also within the central nervous system you have the oligodendrocytes. Within the peripheral nervous system they're called Schwann cells. Within the central nervous system you have gray and white matter. White matter consists of axons, and collection of these axons are called tracts. And gray matter consists of cell bodies of the neurons, and collections of those cell bodies are called nuclei. Within the peripheral nervous system, a collection of axons is called nerve, and a collection of neuronal cell bodies, or soma, are called ganglia, such as you saw the posterior root ganglia. Within the central nervous system, you have both sensory neurons, interneurons, and motor neurons. Sensory neurons are also called ascending because they send information up to the brain, and motor neurons descending. They send information back down from the brain. In the peripheral nervous system, you have only sensory and motor neurons. Okay, motor neurons carry out some actions such as voluntary skeletal muscle movement, and sensory detect sensations such as touch, pressure, pain, temperature, vibration, and other things like that. So finally here we said the peripheral nervous system, types of neurons it contains, the types of nerves it contains include spinal nerves and cranial nerves. Within both you'll have a mixture of somatic and visceral neurons. Somatic neurons are associated with the skin and skeletal muscles. Visceral neurons are associated with visceral organs, internal organs, as well as glands. You can have sensory and motor within each of these, so you can have somatic sensory. An example is sensation of pain. Somatic motor, for example, movement of my hand, the muscle, skeletal muscle of the hand. Visceral sensory, for example, sensation of taste, or when you get some injury to your internal organ like the stomach, for example, you'll sense pain from there. And visceral motor, for example, your salivary glands that secretes saliva in your mouth, or for example, to increase your heart rate. So you have somatic and visceral within those spinal nerves and cranial nerves, which are part of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so now we will begin the brain.